Alright everyone, now we have to talk about Blackpill shills. That is demoralization shills. I've touched on this before, but I don't think I ever did a significant video on the subject. I've pointed this out before. If someone is telling you the world is ending, X group of people is doomed, like white people will die out, men are all going to be slaves wearing chastity belts, stuff like that. You see it on 4chan all the time, and much of it is coming from people that are actually of different ideologies, and they're basically trying to antagonize people. A lot of it glows in the dark. I have a feeling that some of it is meant to try to perturb people into violent or criminal acts. Just a theory that I think that most reasonable people agree with at this point, based on what we've seen across the internet. If somebody is telling you that things are all screwed up, but they're not willing to give any concrete example of a way to potentially address it, that's being a black pill shill, whether they mean it or not. And if even more, if you then provide them with a concrete example of how something can be overcome, well, here's a possible solution to the problem, and they flip shit and start becoming incredulous and red in the face and going crazy, then it's almost certainly shilling, or they've been completely radicalized into a brainwashed lemming-like haze. I see no better example than with certain groups of ethno-nationalists, to tell the truth. Even more so than many groups on the left, in all honesty. The leftists are definitely up there for their derangement in some cases. Like you'd say, let's give a left-wing example first. They would say, police brutality is a huge problem. Police are evil and so forth. You say, okay, why don't we address the fact that the Metro forces involved in that policing are run by people who at least claim to be generally far left and progressive, the problem being they misallocate funds, they misallocate resources, and you have a police force that's under 24/7 stress because there is no tie to the community. That could be part of the problem. Or the fact that the big government that in many cases they want to have more of your tax money for reform and welfare purposes, always squanders that money and enables the police to be potentially brutal. Well, you're just a fascist. I get that all the time. You're providing a concrete example of why the problem exists, how it could be better addressed, which is a reformed local government, less state power, because it inevitably, inexplicably, it will lend that power to the police force. That's the sort of reform that you need. Oh my God, we can't do that. Poverty. Poverty is too prevalent. There's too many poor people. We want to tax the rich, wealth tax, to take care of it. Well, we've been incrementally trying to do that for 50 years and it hasn't worked. Maybe we should try something else, like we could drive wages up by not having limitless illegal immigration. We could always lower the tax rate on small businesses and entrepreneurs to absorb more of a workforce, expand the middle class. Oh my God, well that's voodoo economics. You're a trickle-downer or something. You love corporations. With ethno-nats, which is I think the most predominant example I myself have encountered, because for some reason people initially thought that I was part of an alt-right echo chamber or something. They'd say well, there aren't enough white people, they're losing ground against other people, the white race will disappear, or whatever. Okay, well then, you need to improve yourself, which tends to help your fiscal standing. Not necessarily, but as an aggregate, it allows you more fiscal latitude. Build more skills, work on yourself, and be, noble, learn how to grow your food and stuff. Distance yourself from the materialistic system you yourself identify as problematic and hates you through wokeness and reverse racism, which is to say racism. It's the same thing. And then have an extra kid or two. Oh my God, we can't do that. We can't fight the declining birth rates by having 5 or 6 kids apiece. That's just asinine. How are we supposed to pay for it? Well, you've given an example of something that could potentially address the problem they themselves have identified, and yet you're met with a wall of incredulity. And what you'll see, especially in the online world, is that when you make that suggestion, you'll get dogpiled. So some people might be kind of receptive, but the first people that respond will always be the most vehement and usually call you a shill, despite the fact that they're literally arguing against self-improvement and corrections to systems that they themselves find problem with. This happens with groups typically that are out there. And I don't say that they're problematic, bad, extreme, or conspiratorial. I'm not going to use the loaded establishment language. But groups that tend to deviate from the establishment more. They're more to the left, they're more to the right, ethno-nats, libertarian groups, in all honesty. You talk to libertarians, and you try to suggest that direct action at a local or state level is probably going to work better than trying to mount a presidential campaign. Oh my god, well, you're basically just rolling over and playing dead for the establishment. Well, no, not you're being pragmatic. You're saying you've identified a problem, I have identified at least a presumptive possible solution to the problem, and your cognitive dissonance has kicked in, not allowing you to acknowledge that the problem could potentially be solved. A lot of times groups want to have a victimhood complex and they don't want a solution to the problem. And then you get the problem, as well, of grifters. You get people who will latch on to a political movement, a social idea, something of that, religion, and it happens to spawn this too. They don't want problems to be solved. They're basically the equivalent of Al Sharpton. Let's use him as an example. If racism, which is scant in the United States, the idea that there's like prevalent hate between groups of people is basically a bullshit lie stoked by people like Sharpton and by the MSM for clickbait stories. If it dries up even more, if people generally perceive it as, hey, we're all getting along, there's no race riots, there's no Klan or anything, the Black Panther convention dried up, it was like 5 people. Yeah, well, why do we need to give money to you, Al? Why does my corporation, if there's no problem with racism, why do I feel compelled to give you a payoff? You're saying, well, you're going to raise a stink about something problematic, but there's nothing problematic. Well, you can't shake me down, can you? Mafia style. It's a big problem. Groups, whether extreme or not, that do this, they often spawn individuals that are basically in it for themselves. Like the people that run VLM, they get a nice fat paycheck. They don't care. They don't want Black Lives Matter to actually enforce its goals. What would you, if they got their reparations and they got defund the police and they got housing subsidies and all the other things on their Christmas wish lists, what would they be able to do? They wouldn't have anything to gripe about. They wouldn't keep making money. The war is over. Now the soldiers have to go home. But they don't want to go home. They want to keep being soldiers. Specifically, they want to be in the high command. They don't want to get down in the trenches and have to do any dirty work. They just go and they make a speech and they love it. They get attention and they get money. You see this all the fucking time. People, the grift left, I call them. There are people, especially streamers, on the left. They're not providing any concrete examples of how to actually solve the problems they themselves bitch about on a near daily basis. They just want to be able to bitch. They want to be able to gripe. So when someone like me comes along and says, well, here's at least a possible solution to the problem, we get shit on by the Blackpillers and their various lies. That's about all. Peace out.